My daughter-in-law shoved me hard and snapped, "Don't touch him, you're filthy." Her words cut deeper than her hands. For a moment, my chest froze, but I drew in a breath I'd been holding for years. I picked up the phone and, with 5 steady words, I drew a line she couldn't erase. That was only the beginning of the storm inside my own home. Before I share the story, I'd love to know, how are you doing today? I had lived in that Charleston house nearly all my life, and when Augustus passed, I told Luther and his wife they could stay there. 10 years went by, and I carried hope that the roots we laid down would hold us together. That April afternoon, the air smelled of magnolia and salt from the harbor. My steps felt heavy but expectant as I walked toward the nursery, longing to cradle my first grandchild. Memories of porch swings, Sunday dinners, and Augustus's laughter warmed me. Folks always said, home is where the heart is, but sometimes the heart gets pushed out. I didn't know how true that would feel until I placed my hand on that nursery door. Maris stood inside with the baby wrapped close. When I reached forward, her body stiffened like steel. In a single movement, she shoved me back with one hand and hissed, "Don't touch him, you're filthy." I stumbled, catching the frame to steady myself, breath freezing in my chest. My eyes darted to Luther. He was standing by the dresser, staring at his shoes, lips pressed shut. "Maris," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm his grandmother." She snapped, "You'll contaminate him with your old ways. Stay back." I felt the humiliation rise like fire under my skin, but I swallowed it. In my day, respect wasn't optional. It was the rent you paid to live under a roof. Luther said nothing, and that silence was louder than any slap. My blood froze, not only from her shove, but from his cowardice. That evening, the house grew quiet after supper. I walked through the living room and noticed something wrong. On the wall where Augustus and I once smiled in our wedding photo, there was now a gleaming silver frame. Inside it, Luther and Maris holding the baby. The dusty outline of our old photo left a scar on the paint. I stood staring, heart heavy, as if I had been pushed out twice, once by hand, once by erasure. I touched the empty space where our photo used to be. Maris's polished frame shone under the lamp, deliberate, mocking. My story was being rewritten without me. And I told myself, when someone tries to write you out, that's when you take the pen back. Later in my bedroom, I wrapped Augustus's quilt around me, each stitch a reminder of vows and years we had built. Maris's words echoed, sharp as shards of ice. Yet Luther's silence, his choice to stand mute, was worse. I thought of power differently then, not as yelling or striking back, but as knowing when to hold still and when to move. My blood froze, but it also cleared my vision. In church, the elders used to say, "Silence is not weakness. It's the soil where strength takes root." I finally understood. That night, staring at the ceiling, I knew this storm was only beginning. The morning after that shove, I moved quietly through my house as if dignity could be folded into the cushions I straightened on the porch swing. I brewed a pot of coffee, letting its steam wrap around me like armor. While Luther shuffled at the table, eyes fixed on his toast. Maris was all chatter, offering to handle every little thing, slipping into spaces that were once mine. I stayed calm. Folks in Charleston never forget a scene, and I wasn't about to give them one. Instead, I reminded myself of what an old church friend once taught me. Document first, decide second. I called her, kept my voice steady, said I was fine, though we both knew that word hid a whole storm. I reminded myself of an old saying, courtesy costs nothing, but contempt will charge you interest. By late afternoon, neighbors drifted in with pound cake and cards, their voices filling the house. Maris smiled and guided people to their seats, while I was nudged toward a lonely chair by the hallway restroom. The placement wasn't random. Each time someone passed, brushing against me with an "excuse me," I felt the sting sharpen. The baby was paraded by the window, bathed in sunlight, while I sat in shadows. A neighbor leaned down, asking softly, "Eudora, are you comfortable here?" I answered with a thin smile. I've sat through worse drafts than this. Cameras clicked, Maris posed, always turning the angle to frame me out. Luther hovered nearby, silent as wallpaper. One more humiliation added to the ledger. A woman can swallow pride, but she never forgets the taste. The comments piled up like bricks, neighbors praising Maris for organizing the gathering, someone joking that she had modernized this old place, erasing decades of care I had poured into these walls. I sat with the hum of the bathroom fan behind me, its rhythm mocking. Maris told a guest, "Babies need boundaries," darting her eyes toward me. I lifted my chin and replied, "So do grandmothers." Luther placed a plate for me on a side table behind a fern, then vanished. I moved the church card to the mantel, filling the gap where my wedding photo once hung. Maris swept it away without hesitation. I noted every slight as though pinning butterflies, knowing I'd recall each one when the time came. Down here, sugar can hide venom. Once you learn the recipe, you'll taste it every time. After the guests trickled out, I found myself at the kitchen sink rinsing glasses. Maris leaned against the counter, folder in hand, voice syrupy as she pressed Luther. "It's just a short-term bridge, just a signature. Your mother's name has better credit." My ears sharpened. She smiled at me and said, "Household logistics, nothing you need to worry about." But I stepped closer. If my name is involved, my eyes are required. I read the page, my identity tied to a line of credit, a risk hidden in fine print. Maris cooed, "It's for the baby." I looked her dead in the eye. Babies don't need forged consent, they need honest parents. I placed the folder on the highest shelf. In that silence, Luther still avoided my gaze. Folks say money talks. In kitchens like ours, it whispers, hoping you won't hear. That night, wrapped again in Augustus's quilt, I wrote every detail in my notebook. Time, words, faces. I snapped a photo of the folder, texted Silas Trenholm, "We need to talk." Strength isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's ink on paper and a number saved in your phone. Before sunrise, I dialed Luther and spoke 5 words he couldn't ignore. The dining room glowed that evening, candles flickering against Maris's carefully curated playlist. She had arranged the seating herself, every fork and napkin folded just so, as if the house had always been hers. I was guided to the far end of the table, near the drafty window, a spot where conversations faded into whispers before reaching my ears. A neighbor couple, invited by Maris, sat nearby. One of them chuckled lightly. "You must be the sitter, right?" Laughter rippled as though it were a harmless joke. I smiled politely, though the sting ran deep. How easily people accepted the erasure of a woman in her own home. Luther avoided my eyes, his fork tapping against his plate in nervous rhythm. Sometimes silence isn't golden, it's the cheapest form of betrayal. As plates were passed and stories shared, Maris claimed the spotlight with ease. She gushed about how she had made this old place livable for the baby, dismissing decades of work I had poured into every corner. I kept my voice calm, my face still. When Luther leaned near enough, I whispered, "Even furniture knows who bought it." He shifted, uneasy, but said nothing. My resolve sharpened in that silence. I excused myself before dessert, retreating to the back hallway, my steps steady. Respect denied at the table would be reclaimed at the desk. Later, passing the study, I noticed a folder carelessly left open. Curiosity nudged me, and I stepped inside. My breath caught. Inside were house papers, tampered, twisted, corrupted. My name had been moved aside, replaced by Luther and Maris listed as joint owners. The chill in my chest was heavier than the shove I'd endured. This was theft disguised as ink and formality. I scanned details, a smeared notary stamp, mismatched dates, a page missing my initials. My hands trembled, but not from weakness. I snapped photos with my phone, then slipped a copy into my Bible, marking it with a ribbon. Augustus's voice came back to me, clear as day, never sign blind. Paper cuts deepest when ink replaces truth. That night, wrapped in Augustus's quilt, I sat on the edge of my bed, replaying every slight, every silence. Maris's shove, Luther's stillness, the laughter at dinner, the missing photo, and now the altered deed. They thought I was too old, too fragile to notice. But memory is sharper than any blade, and mine was carving every detail into permanence. I opened my spiral notebook and wrote times, names, phrases, exact words. Tomorrow, I would call the bank. Tomorrow, I would speak with Silas Trenholm. Tomorrow, I would not be erased. Justice doesn't knock. It waits for you to open the door. The next morning, I dialed Luther and told him 5 words that would not be forgotten. I rose before the first streak of daylight touched the marsh. The house was still, the cicadas gone, and the faint call of a marsh bird drifted through the kitchen window. I sat with my spiral notebook open, yesterday's notes stacked neatly beside the phone, and the photographs of those altered papers clipped on top. My gaze lingered on the bare wall where my wedding portrait once hung. The absence no longer hollowed me, it steadied me. I rehearsed a single line in my head, 5 words carved from both pain and resolve. I prayed, not for revenge, but for clarity, and reminded myself, a quiet mind is a loaded compass. If you hold it steady, it points you home. I dialed. Luther's groggy voice answered, the faint cry of the baby echoing from his end of the line. "Ma," he muttered. My tone was even, deliberate, every syllable grounded. This house is still mine. Silence stretched, so wide I could hear the hum of my refrigerator, the groan of a floorboard in his hallway. He tried to gather himself. "Maris said." I cut him off, firm but calm. "Listen before you speak." I listed the facts like ledger entries, the smeared notary stamp, the mismatched dates, the missing initials, the folder left ajar in plain sight. I set boundaries instead of threats. No signatures with my name, no documents leave this house, no gatherings without my say. At noon, we'll sit at the kitchen table. 3 chairs, no more, no less. Truth doesn't shout, it knocks with paperwork. Luther stumbled, his voice catching. "We thought, for the baby, Maris read that." I stopped him, gently but firmly. "Reading blogs is not fiduciary duty, son." The line hissed with his heavy exhale, like a rusted hinge fighting to move. He asked if I was overreacting. I replied, "Overreacting is touching a pen before your brain." He tried one last plea. "Can we keep this between us?" My words carried the final weight. Silas Trenholm is looped. I won't walk blind. I told him to meet me at 10 before the noon sit-down, alone. His reply was smaller than I remembered his voice could ever be. I hung up, not with triumph, but with the anchored calm of a pier bracing against storm tide. A boundary spoken clearly is a bridge that doesn't collapse underfoot. I set a chair at the kitchen table, square to the front door. The house shifted back into its rightful posture. I texted Silas, 10 a.m. prep, noon sit down. He sent back a checklist, IDs, copies, no originals leave. I locked the file drawer, pocketed the key, and slid the folder into a cabinet Maris never touched. On a scrap of paper, I wrote 3 steady lines. No signatures today. No documents leave. We discuss with counsel. I placed 2 mugs by the stove, preparing for the conversation that would define the day. The wood of this house creaked softly, as if even old beams knew who they belonged to. You don't have to raise your voice when your ground is solid. At 10 o'clock, Luther walked in, and by noon, Maris arrived with a folder she thought could corner me. The blinds were half open, slivers of sunlight cutting across the kitchen island like blades. 2 mugs sat ready, one filled, one untouched. Luther sat across from me, shoulders caved in, fiddling with his sleeve as though the fabric might save him from the weight of what was coming. Silence pressed down, heavier than the spring humidity outside. I reminded him, gently but firm, no documents leave this house today. He nodded, though his eyes never rose to meet mine. His phone buzzed twice on the counter. He didn't have to say it. Maris was already on her way. I thought to myself, he wasn't my enemy, but he was certainly her pawn. I reviewed my notebook silently, my plan written as neatly as scripture. When you expect a storm, you set the table for rain. The door swung open, and in she came, heels sharp against the tile, folder tucked under her arm, smile stretched too wide. "Just a formality, Eudora," she sang, her voice honeyed and hurried. "We'll clear this up today." She placed the folder on the island with a little push, sliding it toward Luther first, then turning it toward me. Her tone was all sugar, but I heard the edges. Luther's hand trembled as he nudged it back, refusing to open it. I took my time, finger steady, flipping it open like peeling back layers of deceit. Property, transfer of partial rights. Co-signature lines waiting like open traps. Then my eyes caught it. A clause buried mid-page, dressed in legal jargon, hidden in plain sight. I raised my head. This isn't a formality. This is an attempted theft. Her smile faltered, but her eyes betrayed the calculation behind it. The devil never kicks down doors. It hands you a pen. I read the clause aloud, word by word, so Luther could hear truth, not her. It granted them joint authority to refinance without my consent, handing them control of what Augustus and I built. Maris waved it off, voice higher now. "It's boilerplate, doesn't mean anything." I leaned closer. Boilerplate built plantations, don't dismiss fine print. Luther's Adam's apple bobbed, sweat forming near his temple. "I didn't see that," he whispered. "That's the point," I said. "You weren't meant to." My calm tone sliced sharper than her raised pitch. She accused me of paranoia, but I laid my photos of the tampered documents on the counter, my notes in neat rows, the bank's words backing me up. My hand stayed flat on the folder, commanding the center of the table. The strongest weapon in any room is the sentence you refuse to sign. Maris snapped the folder shut and yanked it back. "We'll revisit this later," she muttered, her sweet tone stripped away. I sat taller. "Not later, not ever, unless counsel is present." I slid the untouched mug toward Luther, a reminder of where the balance sat. He whispered, almost to himself, "Maris, maybe we should step back." Her glare scorched him before swinging to me. Without another word, she stormed out, heels puncturing the silence with every step. I didn't celebrate. I sat still, the kitchen now steady, the line drawn deeper than before. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Attempt 2, documented." Some battles aren't won by shouting, but by surviving the silence afterward. By evening, Maris had gathered allies for a family intervention, but I knew that ambush was mine to flip. I sat square in the middle of my own living room, the very one Augustus and I had worked decades to keep standing. Tonight, it looked less like home and more like a courtroom. Chairs angled in a tight circle, faces turned toward me as if I were on trial. Maris stood in front, arms folded, baby monitor glowing faint on the console. Her voice came honeyed, but I heard the steel beneath. "We just want what's best for the baby." Luther sat 2 cushions back, staring at the border of the rug like it carried all the answers. He wouldn't look at me. Somewhere down the hall, a door clicked shut, a sound I hadn't given permission to make. The lemon scent on the end table stung, Maris's signature of ownership where none was due. I told myself, no raised voice, no tears, only terms. If you're on trial in your own home, the first verdict is how you sit. Maris jingled a key ring, her smile bright. We locked the front room for hygiene. You can stay in the den. My gaze shifted to the pocket doors, the ones that should swing free. I stood, tested them. The latch caught, firm. Authority she hadn't earned. Please don't touch the baby without clearing it with me, she added, eyes fixed on my hands. Luther mumbled from behind her. She's just being careful. His voice smaller than I remembered, more shadow than sun. I walked back to the hearth, laid my palms on the brick, let the cool steady me. I met her stare without blinking. You don't lock out the owner and call it care. Control, dressed as concern, still squeezes the same. Her next move came swift. She opened a fresh folder, slid it across my coffee table with a pen already uncapped. We can end this tension. Sign here, Eudora. Transfer partial rights so decisions are smoother. The words dripped false kindness. Luther shifted, whispering, "It's temporary." I pulled the folder into the light, eye skimming the paragraphs, until I hit the trap. A clause granting them power to refinance without me, without my say. This isn't smooth, it's theft, I said, reading it aloud so Luther couldn't miss a word. Maris cut in, voice sharp now. That's standard. I set the pen upright on its tip, let it fall, watched it roll back toward her. Then standard is where theft learns manners. The most expensive thing you'll ever give away is your name on the wrong line. I drew out my spiral notebook, the one full of photos, dates, lender names, calm evidence lined in ink. Nothing leaves this house. Nothing gets signed, I said, every syllable firm as hammered nails. Luther's eyes flickered, guilt rising through his silence. For a breath, I saw the 16-year-old boy who once asked me for advice with his first paycheck. Maris's face hardened. She slammed the folder shut. You're making this harder than it has to be. My answer carried no shake. Hard is a fence. Impossible is a stranger's hand on my deed. I placed my notebook on the locked doorframe, claiming it in quiet defiance. A firm no is mercy for tomorrow. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. A county officer I had already invited fate to expose. The sky outside had deepened into purple, cicadas humming steady, lamps glowing soft in corners of the house that suddenly felt foreign. A knock sounded at the door, hard, deliberate, not neighborly. Maris's voice carried from the hall, sharp with anticipation. That'll settle this. Luther looked startled, his eyes darting toward me, then away like a boy caught sneaking candy. I opened the door slowly. A man stood in plain slacks, a cheap blazer, flashing a badge that glinted wrong. It looked too new, too plastic. He cleared his throat. County officer, compliance check on residence occupancy. I thought, real officers don't knock like salesmen, and they sure don't avoid eye contact. I stepped back, opened the door wider. Come in, I said, not as surrender, but as strategy. If a wolf wears wool, you don't chase it, you shear it under light. He planted himself near my fireplace, holding papers that looked printed yesterday, not county issued. No seal, no letterhead, no weight of law in the ink. Maris smirked, arms folded, baby monitor glowing at her side. She whispered to Luther, "It's standard procedure." The man's voice droned. Property transfer irregularities, possible misuse of elderly assets. The words sounded rehearsed, not official. My palms dampened, but my tone stayed even. Then you'll have no issue if I call the county clerk to confirm. His eyes flickered. No need, it's routine. Maris broke in. Mom, don't make this worse. Just cooperate. Luther sat tight, caught in her shadow. I watched the man closely. His shoes were scuffed, badge laminate bubbling, and Charlotteston spelled with 2 S's. They didn't expect me to notice. Respectable lies unravel when you tug at their spemming. I walked to my study, returned with my spiral notebook and photographs. I laid them out on the coffee table, cards in a final hand. Here's the real irregularity, I said. Forged papers left on my desk, stamped with a notary whose license expired last year. I slid the photos toward him. His hand hovered, then pulled back. Luther's voice cracked. "Maris, what is this?" For the first time, his words tilted against her. She snapped. "She's manipulating you, Luther. Old folks get paranoid." My voice sharpened. Paranoia doesn't print dates wrong. Paranoia doesn't fake seals. I read aloud the number of the notary license, then matched it with a printout from the official site. The man's forehead glistened, his confidence draining. "I'll have to step outside," he muttered. "Not until the real sheriff hears me," I said, dialing Silas on speaker. His steady voice filled the realm. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Carville." The air shifted. Silence pressed in. Maris pale. Luther trembling. Truth wears boots. When it enters, the noise clears a room. Luther finally turned, tears edging his eyes. "Did you set me up?" I answered softly. "No, son. I set up the truth." Maris exploded. "This is harassment. She's ruining us." But her hands shook, nails tapping the baby monitor like Morse code. Luther pushed the folder away from her, whispering, "You promised it was clean." His words weren't loud, but they cracked the shell of their alliance. The man in the blazer slipped toward the door. "Leave the badge here," I told him. "It doesn't belong to you." He froze, then dropped it on the console before vanishing into the night. I picked up the flimsy plastic, placed it atop my notebook. Proof layered on proof. When masks fall, even silence has a face. But even as Maris faltered, she reached for one last weapon, family loyalty twisted into a noose. The living room looked dressed for company, but not for me. Bay window curtains tied back, folding chairs angled toward the spot Maris had chosen for herself, while my favorite armchair was shoved into the corner like a piece gone out of style. Neighbors filed in with casserole dishes, two church mothers setting theirs down with quiet dignity. Talk floated about the marsh breeze and the baby's sleep habits. Maris floated through in her pale dress, correcting anyone who called it Eudora's house with, "Oh, our home, yes." Luther lingered in the hall, baby monitor clutched like a shield, his eyes tired, his stance uncertain. I stepped in with only two things, Augustus's leather-bound photo album and a slim blue folder. I set them on the coffee table, square by the mantel, not the corner where I'd been pushed. If folks write you out of the program, bring your own headline. Maris tapped her glass. "To new beginnings," she chirped, thanking the guests for celebrating our home and our new little man. She gestured at the wall where my wedding portrait once hung. In its place, a collage of her, Luther, and the baby smiled down like curated history. A hush spread when I stood, opened the album, and revealed Augustus in his navy suit, our porch behind him, a photograph rooted in time. "This house was bought by these hands and kept by this marriage," I said. I lifted a framed reprint from the sleeve, our wedding photo, and placed it back on the mantel where it belonged. The room's chatter stilled. Luther's lips parted, but no words came. Maris's smile froze, edges tight. Heritage doesn't need permission to enter its own room. I reached into the blue folder and pulled out the certified deed, my name alone, Eudora May Carville. I laid it beside the album. "To clear any confusion," I said, my voice steady, "this deed stands in my name only. Effective today, a 30-day notice to vacate has been served." From the back, Silas stepped forward, confirming service, verifying the trail of forgeries and the fake officer's badge. I unfolded the evidence for all to see. Expired notary seals, mismatched dates, transcripts with spelling errors bold as daylight. Maris tried to cut in. "This is harassment." My reply landed sharp. "No, this is my property and your pattern." A murmur rippled, one church mother nodding solemnly, neighbors shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. "Until vacate," I continued, "no documents leave this home. The study is locked, the nursery is off liars. Mercy is not the absence of boundaries, it's the fence you build with the gate still working." Luther stepped forward, his voice hushed. Mama, I'm sorry. I met his eyes. Make it useful. Truth is the only apology I can spend. Maris reached for him, whispering poison about loyalty, but his feet held still. The baby monitor light blinked steady in his hand. I slid him a copy of the rules. Quiet hours, restricted rooms, no papers signed with my name. Then I closed the album, resting my palm on its leather cover. The house exhaled, walls remembering who they belonged to. I met Maris's eyes across the silence. This legacy isn't for sale. Strength isn't a storm, it's the shoreline that outlasts one. 30 days later, the keys I held felt lighter, and what I chose to leave on the mantel might surprise you.